All right, guys. Today we're going to go over some more whitetail deer notes, specifically how to age deer both on the hoof as well as using the jawbone. And so, if you would, we're going to follow along on the notes here. The notes should be on your Canvas page. All right. So, deer identification and aging. I'll agree with this statement. One of the most important skills for any deer manager involved with quality deer management, which is QDMA, is the ability to age deer before and after the harvest. So if you're talking about hunting and you're trying to have a good management plan, you need to know what it is that you're harvesting, and specifically, you need to know how old it is that whatever deer you're harvesting. And so you've got to be able to do that before a hunter pulls the trigger, right? Without knowing the deer's age, it's unfair to compare deer by body weight and antler size. It's also important to know the age structure of your deer herd to know where your program is and where it is going to set realistic goals and expectations. So you got to think about it before you pull the trigger, and then you kind of have to check yourself after you pull the trigger if you're harvesting deer. So specifically, we're going to look at how to identify, all the different deer that should be in a population. The first is easiest, fawns. Those are the most easily identifiable. Young fawns are easily identifiable by their size and spots. All right, they are very small deer, and they also have spots on them typically. But you can have an older fawn that is still not mature enough. And as you can see, the one on the right here in this picture is a fawn. It has a short, square body. It's got a short neck. It's got a compact nose and head, less muscle definition. It's got a flat belly, a flat back, or flatter belly and flatter back. And then a big key indicator here is that there's light to no stain on the tarsal glands. So you got to refer back to what we talked about earlier with the different glands on a whitetail deer, and the tarsal glands here on the back hind legs have very little stain. So on the left-hand side, you have an adult, certainly larger. On the right-hand side, you have a fawn, certainly smaller. But if they're not there side by side, then it's hard to kind of compare when you're talking about size. So you've got to look for other key characteristics. So a doe fawn, again, you're going to have a compact nose. So that face looks pretty compact right there. The ears appear to be too large in regards to the proportion of the head. And it just has this overall juvenile look. It looks like it's not an adult yet. The forehead will appear rounded compared to the flat forehead of a buck fawn. Okay. So a buck fawn, the key head size and shape features include a compact nose and forehead, just like the buck doe. The ears appear to be too large in proportion to the head, just like a fawn doe, a fawn doe. And an overall juvenile look, again, similar to a fawn doe. And then the really only big difference that you can tell is a flattened appearance of the top of the head due to the developing pedicles. And again, the pedicles are the things that antlers grow out of. Okay. That's why people call them a button buck. They got little buttons on top of their head, which are pedicles. All right, I've got a poster inside my classroom, and you can see this whenever you're able to come in here. But this is the poster, identifying antlerless deer. It's best for information and photos to identify buck and doe fawns. So, button buck behavior: lone antlerless deer are often buck fawns, like this one. Button bucks are less wary than adults, often wandering ahead of other groups, and they also tend to be bolder than doe fawns. So, it's the whole boy attitude. They're a little bit more daring, a little bit more willing to go off on their own, and that's obvious behavior in a doe. In a button buck, which is a buck fawn, a male fawn. All right. So then you got an adult doe. Here you got an elongated nose. It's no longer compact. It's an elongated nose and forehead. So if you look at these pictures, you can kind of see it's longer. It's not as compact. Ears do not appear to be too large for the head. And overall, it's a little bit more muscular. All right. You got a mature musculature and shape of the face and the head and the neck. Okay. Body features, it's a long rectangular body, a long neck, defined musculature. You got a little bit of a sagging belly here, and then you can have a swayed back, a little bit droopy in the back, and then light to moderate stain on tarsal glands. But with here, you got an aging bucks on the hoof, all right? So we're gonna get into bucks. There is a video, I'll probably attach it in the Canvas page. This is a PDF file, so I can't hit play here, but look for that video. A quick YouTube search should pull it up. But you can look at this 1.5-year-old bucks, all right? Again, you're never gonna harvest a buck or a doe for that matter that is 1, 2, 3, or 4 years old. It's not gonna be an even number. Deer are born in the spring, just like most mammals, and then they are harvested in the hunting season of the fall. And so because of that, it's going to be a half a year old, which is a fawn, which hopefully a hunter wouldn't shoot or harvest. And then you have 1.5, 2.5, 3.5-year-old bucks, all the way up to 6.5, maybe even 7.5-year-old bucks. But in this case, a 1.5-year-old buck, it's got a thin neck, slim body. Looks like a doe with antlers. All right, it's got pretty much the same body formation. It's just that it's got antlers. There's a distinct line of separation between the neck and the shoulder. All right, the neck is skinny and then the shoulder gets a little bit thicker. No muscle definition. It's pretty sleek looking. It looks really thin and athletic, I guess. Wide potential for number of antler points, but antlers are thin. So this is an issue. A lot of people think that you can judge a deer by the size of the antlers, and you really can't. Antlers have a lot to do with genetics and nutrition that is available to the deer population. And so don't just go by the antlers. You really do need to look at body definition. So in this case, a 1.5-year-old buck could be an 8-pointer, could be a 6-pointer, could be a 4-pointer. But the antlers are typically going to be thin. So look for that. And then again, little or no tarsal staining, tarsal gland staining. 2.5-year-old bucks, still relatively thin waist and shoulders. All right, they're not going to be gigantic. Hindquarters are proportional to the chest and shoulder area. You've got minimal neck swelling during the rut. All right, so during the rut, which is the time that all the whitetail deer are breeding, they're going to, have a little bit more of a swelling of the neck. Otherwise, it's going to be pretty thin. Lightly stained tarsal glands. You can see the tarsal glands in this picture. You can see the neck width is roughly equal to the face width. All right, it's not going to be, the neck should not come out past the face if you're looking at it head on. And then the back and belly are flat or level. So if you look at this one's back and you look at the belly, this is a great picture of how level it is. And then you got 3.5-year-old buck, thickly muscled neck, all right, during the rut. There's still separation between the neck and shoulders. You can clearly see that the neck and the shoulders are different. The chest, shoulder area now begins to look heavier than the hindquarters, all right. The overall look of an athlete in prime condition, good muscle tone, but still lanky and lean. The neck is now wider than the face, especially during the rut, and the back and belly are still flat and tight. But then you start getting into these 4.5-year-old bucks, and there's a clear difference compared to this in a 1.5 and 2.5. Fully muscled neck blends into the shoulders seamlessly. So there's less of a line that separates the shoulders from the neck. All right, this is like a seamless transition between the neck and the shoulders. There's no longer a lanky or lean look to it. The leg length is proportional to the body size. Waistline has dropped and is now level with the chest line. And then the tarsal glands are large and very dark, especially during the rut, okay? You got to think about the tarsal glands and the rut. The rut is all about, them communicating, wanting to mate with each other. And so the glands they're going to be very dark because they're going to be very active during the rut. And then five and a half plus year old bucks. We're not going to really get into 6.5, 7.5 because the look is kind of the same. For 5.5 plus year old bucks, you got a shoulder and a neck that appears to be one large mass. The belly is rounder. You can see in this scenario, the belly has a little round look to it, and it may sag except when post-rut weight loss is a factor. So they'll actually lose weight. All right? They've been running through the woods during the rut, and they're going to lose some weight. And then the legs begin to appear too short for the massive body. All right, the body's kind of overtaking the size of the legs. The neck is, it says think, but it should say thick and heavy, but the skin still appears tight. The head appears very deep and heavy from a profile view. And then the forehead is darkened by gland secretions. So again, there is a gland on the forehead and it gets darker as they get older. Aging jawbones is really the true way of aging a deer. But unless you have your deer trained, it's much harder to age jawbones while they're still alive. So after a deer has been harvested, that is when you want to actually look at the jawbone and have a really good feel for how old that deer is or was. The most common technique to age is in fact tooth replacement and the wear technique. So what happens is just like you have baby teeth, just like we have baby teeth, deer have baby teeth. And they have all the same type of teeth that we have with the exception of canines. They have premolars, molars, milk teeth. You and I, you watch toothpaste commercials, they're talking about enamel and dentine, and it's no different than in deer. So you can see all of these definitions right here. I'm not going to go over these, but I will reference them when we're talking about the other parts of jawbones. So the easiest one to identify is the fawn, okay? And it's because there's only 4 teeth on a fawn. If you look in this picture, you got P1, P2, P3, and M1. The P stands for premolar. The M stands for molar. So you have on the right-hand side would be the front of the mouth. On the back, on the left-hand side would be the back of the mouth. And so on a deer, there are actually 3 teeth. On a baby deer, a fawn, there's 4 teeth. I said 3 because on this third tooth, it's a baby tooth. All these are baby teeth. But this third tooth, this third premolar, there's 3 cusps. So a lot of people look at this and they think that each one of these are individual teeth, but they are not. This is the third premolar. It is a baby tooth, and this tooth has 3 cusps. And so that is an indicator of it being 1.5 years old or less. So in this scenario, it is a fawn because there are only 4 teeth. You will see that 5th tooth emerging. That's where that one's going to come out. That'll be the second molar, but it's not there yet. So it's a fawn. And then in the adult tooth, you're going to have on the adult jawbone, you're going to have 6 teeth. So again, 3 premolars and then 3 molars. But that third tooth can change. All right, it changes, and we'll get into that. Pardon, there's an announcement.
Good morning, trainers. Associates have arrived. Please greet them at your door. Again, associates have arrived. Please greet them at your door. Thank you.
All right, pardon the interruption. But again, a half-a-year-old deer, which would be a fawn, basically you have 3 or 4 fully erupted teeth on one side of the lower jaw. The P3, which is the premolar 3, is a temporary 3-crested milk tooth. So a milk tooth is what we call a baby tooth. And again, it has 3 crests. M1, which is molar 1, will be very white and unstained. Fawns are the easiest group to age. The key to recognizing this group is the number of teeth, the presence of the milk teeth, and a very short jawbone. So it's going to be smaller. There's only going to be 4 teeth, and the third tooth has 3 cusps. That's how you tell if it's a fawn. Okay? Now, when we get into 1.5-year-old deer, what happens now is that there are 6 teeth. Okay? So there's 6 teeth on the lower jaw, although the 6th tooth, which is the third molar, M3 may not be fully erupted if the deer was born late or harvested early in the hunting season. So if it was born in late spring and you harvested it in early or middle September because of hunting season, you know, as an archery bow hunting in the state of Georgia, well, then it's not nearly as developed as one that was harvested in January. And so it's possible that this sixth tooth is emerging. In most cases, P3 will be a temporary milk tooth with 3 crests. However, if the animal was harvested late in the season or an early born fawn, it may have already replaced the temporary P3 with a permanent one. This is easily recognizable because the new P3 will only have 2 crests and it will be very white and show almost no wear. Note that the permanent tooth erupting underneath the temporary one in the photo, the key to identifying this group is the presence of 6 jaw teeth with a 3 cusp P3. All right, so what all that means is if you look at this third tooth, there are technically 3 cusps. So you look at it says B and there's 3 different arrows. All right, they're going to be worn down a little bit because that milk tooth, the baby tooth, is not supposed to last for a long time. And then you can see that there's one popping up underneath it and it's going to pop that other tooth out. That's how we lose teeth, because there's another one coming in to replace it. And so if you see a deer jawbone that has 6 teeth, but this third tooth, the third premolar, has 3 cusps, well, then that means that it is a 1.5-year-old deer. Okay, we can't tell if it's a buck or a doe, but we can tell that it's 1.5-year-old. All right, so now we get into some of this gray area. All right, we got to look at tooth wear. So as we eat, no different than deer, but particularly in deer, you got to think deer are chewing on sticks. They're getting they're eating grass that maybe they get some sand in it, some dirt in it, and so they're wearing down those teeth. And they don't go to the dentist like you and I hopefully do, but tooth wear criteria are based on the level of tooth wear on deer 2.5 years of age or older. As the teeth wear down over time, the width of the dentine increases in relationship to the surrounding enamel. This process can be described as a sharp mountain peak being eroded by weather until the peak disappears. The outer shell of the mountain is the enamel, and the inner portion is the dentine. As the peak disappears, more of the inner portion, the dentine, is exposed and appears wider. All right, so what that means here, there's a pattern. So if you can identify a fawn, and then you can identify a 1.5-year-old deer, and then you understand the 2.5-year-old deer, there's going to be a pattern for 2.5, 3.5, 4.5, 5.5. Excuse me, bless me. All right, so dentine and enamel. Enamel, just like on all of the toothpaste commercials that you and I see, enamel is the white stuff for teeth. The dentine is the black stuff that we're going to see. So I'm going to read this and then try to explain it. But the 2.5-year-old deer, the presence of all 6 permanent teeth on the lower jaw. So again, an adult deer, 1.5 years old and older, has all 6 teeth. All right, it will never lose any more teeth that makes it less than 6. If it's a 1.5-year-old deer or older, it's going to have 6 teeth. There's going to be 3 premolars and 3 molars. P3 is a permanent 2-crested tooth, and M3 is fully erupted. All right, so 1.5 years old and younger, this tooth had 3 crests, but now it doesn't. Now it only has 2. So if we see the third tooth, which is the third premolar, then that means that it is at least 2.5 years old. All right, so we can always bank on that. It's at least 2.5 years old. But if it's at least 2.5 years old, then we have to figure out, is it 2.5, 3.5, 4.5, 5.5? All right, so we're going to look at that. The dentine width on the lingual crest of M1 is equal to or narrower than the one strip of the surrounding enamel. All right, so basically, is there on M1, which is, it says B here because that was point B, is the black strip thin? Is it really, really thin compared to the white enamel that is around it? All right, so remember a minute ago I talked about a pattern. Right now, even though it doesn't say this on the screen, look at M2 and M3. You could hardly see any black. All right, there's very little. But on M1, which would be the oldest molar, the black is starting to spread out a little bit on a 2.5-year-old deer. And so you look for that. Little on point C here, it says little or no dentine is showing on the lingual side of the second crest of M3. So this one right here, remember this is what I just said. There's very little, if any, black showing on M3. And so we know that it is a 2.5-year-old deer because this is like a brand new tooth. All right. The back cusp may be worn level, but not slanting towards the buccal side or cupping. This age group is identified by the presence of 6 fully erupted permanent teeth, the narrow dentine width on M1, which is right here, it's really narrow, and by the minimal wear on the last molar, which is M3, especially on the back cusp, which is right here. Okay. So now, if you're looking at 3.5 years old, you can see that on that third molar, on that first molar, it got wider. All right. You can go back and look at the notes, but you can compare the two. But that right there is a 2.5-year-old deer. And this dentine is pretty thin compared to a 3.5-year-old deer. There's more dentine, more black. Okay. And also you can look on M3, the black started to show up. Okay. So again, we know that this is at least at least 2.5 years old, because again, this has 2 cusps. It definitely does not have 3. All right. So we know that this is not a 1.5-year-old or a fawn. So it's at least 2.5 years old. And so then we have to look at M1. We've already said that there is more dentine here than there was on a 2.5. And we can also see more dentine here, which you should not have been able to see on a 2.5-year-old deer. And so then you start looking at the other dentine. So light to moderate wear is evident on P1, P2, and P3. Definitely see more black here because there's more dentine. The dentine is showing slightly on the lingual side of the second crest of M3. So again, you can see more dentine here. And that's basically it. There's more dentine than there was on a 2.5-year-old deer. So now, 4.5-year-old deer. These teeth are starting to wallow out. They're not nearly as sharp as what they used to be. And that's because, like I said earlier, they're chewing on some stuff. Again, this is a 4.5-year-old deer that we're looking at now. So the first thing that I'm looking at is that P3. There's definitely not 3 crests. There's only 2. It's at least a 2.5-year-old deer. All right. Now we have to figure out if it's 2.5, 3.5, 4.5, 5.5. We look at M1. All right. M1, you got a lot of dentine wear. All right. Then we look at these points here. The dentine width on the lingual crest of both M1 and M2 are noticeably wider than one strip of the surrounding enamel. The dentine width on M3 is equal to or narrower than one strip of the surrounding enamel. So you're basically comparing the dentine to the black part to the white part beside it. And this dentine is bigger than the white strip beside it. And so we're looking at the second one. So on 2.5 and 3.5, we're basically looking at M1, then M2, and then M3. Wear is becoming pronounced on P1, P2, and P3. The lingual crest of P3 may be starting to erode away. So these are all starting to get flat. The premolars are starting to get flat. And then part C, dentine is very pronounced on both lingual crest of M3. The back cusp of M3 is showing pronounced wear and slanting sharply to the buccal side or beginning to cup. So all of a sudden we're seeing a lot more wear on this M3 here. All right. 5.5-year-old. The dentine width on the lingual crest of M1, M2, and M3 are all noticeably wider than one strip of the surrounding enamel. So if you look, this black spot, the black strip is much wider on M1, M2, and M3 than the enamel. All right, the black is wider than the white. Wear is becoming heavy on P1. That P1 tooth is like almost gone. P1, P2, and P3, the lingual crest of P2 and P3 are often worn nearly flat. So this is almost a flat tooth. All right. The back cusp of M3 is slanting. So the back cusp right here is slanting heavily to the buccal side. In most cases, a noticeable cup is evident in the center of the back cusp. So this is going to cup out, like it's going to be like a cup. It's going to be wallowed in, worn in. Animals 4.5 and 5.5 years of age are often difficult to separate. The key to making this distinction is by paying close attention to the dentine width on the lingual crest of M3 and the wear on P3 and M1. All right, so once you get above 5.5, it just starts to look old. Everything starts to flatten out. I'm never going to ask you if it's 6.5 years old. I'm going to ask you if it's 4.5 or older. So if you can say 4.5 or older, even for a management perspective, that's really all you need to know. Is it 4.5 or older, in my opinion? But if you want to get a little bit more accurate, more detailed, then you can still look at the jawbone and see if it's 5.5, 6.5. So going through the points here, the dentine width on the lingual crest of M1 and M2 and M3 are all noticeably wider than one strip of the surrounding enamel. M1 is heavily worn, and the infundibulum is beginning to wear away. So this is really, really thick on M1. There's a lot more black than there is white. Wear is very heavy on P1, P2, and P3. Again, P1 looks like it's about to fade away. All right. The lingual crest of P2 and P3 and M1 are worn nearly flat. These teeth are nearly flat. The back cusp of M3 is heavily worn and deeply cupped. The key to separating a 5.5-year-old from a 6.5-year-old is by the level of wear on M1 and M3 and by the erosion of the lingual crest on P3 and M1. Any deer showing more wear than described here should be classified as 6.5+ years old. All right, and there's some videos, and I'm going to put the videos on our Canvas page to help you out because maybe he can do it better than I can, Mr. Brian Murphy. But if I can help out with anything else, let me know. I think it's really important to try to age jawbones. If you can go to a hunt and there are people that are harvesting many deer, it's a great opportunity to practice and to sit around and discuss. There's a lot of online tools, and I have a lot of jawbones here in class that we will look at. But again, a lot of people unfortunately harvest 1.5-year-old deer, and the biggest thing there is, does that third premolar have 3 cusps? Is it still a baby tooth or not? If it's 3 cusps on the third premolar, then you know it's at least that it's 1.5 years or younger. If that third premolar only has 2 cusps, then you know that that is the adult tooth and it is a 2.5-year-old deer or older. Again, you can't tell if it's a buck or a doe by the deer, but hopefully you can tell that before you pull the jawbone out of the deer that is harvested. Thank you for listening. If you need me to go over anything, let me know.